Everyone, this is the second of three videos that I'm going to do on Everything is Eliminated. And today we're going to address the question, how is this a postmodern novel? Which sounds suspiciously like a final exam question, or final essay question. So, three things, I think. Firstly, we're back to this instability of the signifying chain that you're familiar with now. So we have that happening a lot in this novel, with multiple displacements, metaphoric displacements of the signifieds, but also even with the difficulty of locating a signifier or identifying a signifier itself. That may be a bit confusing at the moment, but I'll come to it in a second. So we have that going on. Secondly, we have intertextuality. Again, we're familiar with this because we looked at it with Stoppard's play Travesties. And of course, we have it in Borges's story that we looked at too. So we have a babble of interlacing texts. I'm sure you picked that up as you were reading the novel. And the effect of that can be quite disconcerting and challenging as a reader. And thirdly, we have meta-narrative or meta-fiction. So whenever we describe something as meta, what we are saying is that it's drawing attention to its own construction, its own process of coming into being or fashioning. And so we have meta fiction here with texts which are drawing attention to the process of their being written in front of us. And again, that creates a sort of sense of everything being hesitant, unfinished, and provisional. Really, it's difficult for me to think of a novel which exemplifies postmodern writing better than this. It's got everything, really, that we could want to find in postmodern writing. So what I'm going to do in this video is just split it into these three things, these three parts. And give you some examples as I go through it. So let's, as part one, deal with the instability of the signifying chain. Of course, I mentioned this in the previous video. We have lots of names that kind of interchange with each other, sort of confusing signifieds. We have an Augustine who is a Lister, who's not an Augustine. We have a Alexander who's an Eli. You get it, right? And if we take, as I did in the last video, quick reprisal, if we take the signifier broad, we have the signified of miraculous baby, child, young woman, mother, great-great-grandmother of Jonathan Safran Foer. Broad is also the signified text, signified river. All of these different sort of displacements metaphorically. Let's take another one and a place name here, Trachimbrod. It's interesting when you Google it and sort of go down that rabbit hole that you find all sorts of different spellings of the signifier itself. You can come across as Trachenbrod, Trachembrod. I've come across Trochenbrod, also Sofievka and Zofievka with a Z. So that's what I meant earlier by when I said, that the signifier itself can be unstable and difficult to pin down. And then when we look at the signified, you'd think it's a place, right? It seems to be a place, but where is it? In fact, what we have here is a signified which is an absence of a place. Let's just pin that down. So 115. So here they are, they stopped someone in the fields. There were no people anywhere, and when there was a person, the person could not help us. Go away. There is no Trachimbrod here. I do know what you're speaking of. You are lost. It was seeming as if we were in the wrong country, or the wrong century, or as if Trachimbrod had disappeared, and so had the memory of it. And then on 154, This is when they're with Lister, who of course they think of as Augustine. Could you exhibit us this house? I asked. There is nothing, she said. I already told you, nothing. It used to be 4 kilometers distance from here, but everything that still exists from Trachenbrod is in this house. You say it's 4 kilometers from here? There is no Trachenbrod anymore. It ended 50 years ago. Take us there, grandfather said. There is nothing to see. It's only a field. I could exhibit you any field, and it would be the same as exhibiting you Trachenbrod. We've come to see Trachenbrod, grandfather said, and you will take us to see Trachenbrod. It's signified of no place at all, of absence, which is actually something we encounter quite a lot in this novel, and I'll come back to it again later in this video. Another signified here of Trachenbrod is memory. That's what it now is. It's not a physical location, it's just a memory, and it's a memory to be found in a box, which is Lister's remains box. Page 150 is when she pulls it out. And in that box are fragments of texts and photographs. So that's what the signified ends up being. Let's look at another example of a very important signifier as it sort of weaves through the novel, which is Augustine. So what does Augustine signify? Lots of different things, it seems to me. At one level, the signified is a visual image. And I will actually talk to you in much more detail about the photograph itself in the next video. But we have a visual image as signified of let's say, an attractive girl who we know somehow connects to Jonathan Safran Foer's grandfather. But the signified Augustine is projected onto or becomes a label used or given to someone else, which is Lister. And Augustine is actually never provided to us as a person, never actually identified. So again, there's a sense of an absence sort of behind the signified here. Let's trace this through for you. So page 111. I observed the photograph while he observed the beautiful day. So this is Alex. Augustine had such pretty hairs. They were thin hairs. I did not need to touch them to be certain. Her eyes were blue. Even though the photograph lacked colour, I was certain that her eyes were blue. So as we'll see in a moment, a lot of what Augustine signifies is what they want her to signify. Yeah? Okay, from there to page 148. This is where, so this is when Alex is watching Lister, the old woman. I could not retrieve my eyes from her. She had thin fingers and high bones. Her hairs, as I mentioned, were white and long. The ends of them moved against the floor, taking the dust and dirt with them. It was rigid to examine her eyes because they were so far back in her face, but I could see when she looked at me that they were blue and resplendent. It was her eyes that let me understand that she was, without a query, the Augustine from the picture. And I was certain, looking at her eyes, that she had saved the hero's grandfather, and probably many others. I could imagine in my brain how the days connected the girl in the photograph to the woman who was in the room with us. Each day was like another photograph. Her life was a book of photographs. One was with the hero's grandfather, and now one was with us. And then on page 50, 150, who is Augustine? She asked. What? I asked, who is Augustine? Augustine. What's the saying? The photograph, grandfather said to me. We do not know what the writing is in the back. It might not be her name. I exhibited her the photograph again. Again, she made to cry, this is you? Grandfather said, pointing the finger made at her in the photograph. Here, you are that girl. Augustine moved her head to say, no, this is not me. Cross the page halfway down. "What are you saying?" the hero asked. "Grandfather thinks she's Augustine," I told him, "even though she says she isn't." And then 181. "I have never been in one of those," said the woman we continued to think of as Augustine, even though we knew that she was not Augustine. What Augustine becomes, the signifier, what it becomes, I think, for these guys, is a symbol for whatever they want, whatever they need, whatever they desire. That's what the signified is. 154. About a third of the way down, 154, and then I remembered that I did not know this woman's name. I persevered to think of her as Augustine because, like grandfather, I could not stop desiring that she was Augustine. And we have that coming back again on page 241, quite profoundly, I think. This is Alex's letter to Jonathan. I did not give grandfather the money because I do not believe in Augustine. No, that's not what I mean. I do not believe in the Augustine that grandfather was searching for. The woman in the photograph is alive, I'm sure of it. But I'm also sure that she's not Herschel, as grandfather wanted her to be. And she's not my grandmother, as he wanted her to be. And she is not father, as he wanted her to be. If I gave him the money, he would have found her. And he would have seen who she really is. And this would have killed him. I'm not saying this metaphorically. It would have killed him. So Augustine, for the grandfather, for Eli, represents everything that is somehow absent from his life, everything that he regrets. Okay, so these are single word signifiers I've been looking at. So let's sort of broaden out a bit and think of a signifier as a grouping of words or a phrase. But we're still going to find the same instability here. So let's think about the little note written to Yankel by his wife, who goes off with another man. And if you remember, she writes, "I had to do it for myself." Now, Yankel, as you will remember, tries to get rid of this bloody thing in whichever way he can, but he can't. And so it's just a kind of playful way in which Jonathan Safran Foer, I think, is saying, you know, words are slippery little suckers, right? And phrases too, and they go off on their own trajectories. It's like they have a mind of their own. Okay, so let's look at this, page 44. Here it is. Yankel had lost 2 babies, one to fever and the other to the industrial flour mill, which had taken a shtetl member's life every year since it first opened. He'd also lost a wife, not to death, but to another man. He'd returned home from an afternoon at the library to find a note covering the shalom of their home's welcome mat. "I had to do it for myself." Okay, so there's the phrase. And then next page, halfway down. "He couldn't bear to live, but he couldn't bear to die. He couldn't bear the thought of her making love to someone else, but neither could he bear the absence of the thought. And as for the note, he couldn't bear to keep it, but he couldn't bear to destroy it either. So he tried to lose it. He left it by the wax-weeping candle holders, placed it between matzahs every Passover, dropped it without regard among rumpled papers in his cluttered desk, hoping it wouldn't be there when he returned, but it was always there. He tried to massage it out of his pocket while sitting on the bench in front of the fountain of the prostrate mermaid, but when he inserted his hand for his hanky, it was there. He hid it like a bookmark in one of the novels he most hated, but the note would appear several days later between the pages of one of the Western books that he alone in the shtetl read. It kept returning to him. It stayed with him, like a part of him, like a birthmark, like a limb. It was on him, in him, his him. I had to do it for myself. And then on page 49, the real note kept returning to him. And that, he was sure, was what kept him from that most simple and impossible thing, happiness. I had to do it for myself. Brod discovered it one day, when she was only a few years old. It had found its way into her right pocket, as if the note had a mind of its own, as if those 7 scribbled words were capable of wanting to inflict reality. I had to do it for myself. She either sensed the immense importance of it or deemed it entirely unimportant, because she never mentioned it to Yankel, but put it on his bedside table, where he would find it that night after rereading another letter that was not from her mother and not from his wife. I had to do it for myself. Finally, just working on this instability of the signifying chain, we have Alex's sort of pidgin English, which provides a lot of the humor of the text. You know, he manufactures Z's for sleeping, he dubs things. Things are not hard, but they're rigid. I mean, there are so many examples, right? You can think of for yourself. The one that leapt out to me was on page 6. This is the grandfather, who's this grumpy old sod. When the 3 of us, the 3 men named Alex, gathered in father's house that night to converse the journey, grandfather said, I do not want to do it. I am retarded, and I did not become a retarded person in order to have to perform things like this, shit like this. Retarded for retired, right? So that's happening as well. Okay, now let's move to the second sort of element of this today, which is the intertextuality of the book. All these interlacing texts. And really, in a sense, everything we've been saying about the signifying chain so far applies here. It's just on a macro level. You know, signifiers now are whole chunks of text, but often the signifiers are still unclear or uncertain, or the provenance of this is uncertain. We have, as I mentioned earlier, a sort of babble of texts which are in the process of being written, you know, in front of us. And this is called metalepsis. So this is often referred to as a rhetorical device. It's when you have sort of one narrative plane intruding on another. So what are all these texts? Just to remind ourselves, we have Alex's letters in italics to Jonathan. We have Alex's account. We have Jonathan Safran Foer's Jewish stories. We have Jonathan Safran Foer's diary. We have a grandfather's diary. And then we have all these other fragments of Jewish texts. So I think this is important, because I think one of the key messages of the book is that we only really know of ourselves in the stories that we tell to each other and exchange with each other. And as I was saying in the very first video of this course, you can't do that without implementing memory, so that who and what we are is the stories that we tell each other that are actually recountings, retellings, memories of what's happened, retrievals of what's happened. Excuse me. So let's work our way through some of these Jewish memory texts, starting with the Book of Recurrent Dreams. So this takes us to page 36. So it is most important that we remember. The narcoleptic potato farmer did less, said to the congregation. Remember what? The what is not so important, but that we should remember. It is the act of remembering, the process of remembrance, the recognition of our past. Memories are small prayers to God, if we believed in that sort of thing. For it says somewhere something about just this. So, I swear, it was right here, the thing I was missing. Has anyone seen the Book of Antecedents around? And now we're going to have, at the top of the next page, the Book of Recurring Dreams, which he pulls out. So I'll come back to the antecedents in a moment. What we have on the next few pages is extracts from the Book of Recurring Dreams. And so we have the dream of sex without pain here. We have the dream of, silly as it sounds, flight. The dream of the waltz of feast, famine, and feast. There are lots of time slips happening in this text. And one of the dreams that is written down in this book of recurring dreams is Broad's dream that she's a river and receiving dead bodies, which is what we have on page 272. And this is that slip of paper that the Nazi soldier lets go. So here, a young soldier tossed the 9 volumes of the Book of Recurrent Dreams onto the bonfire of Jews, not noticing in his haste to grab and destroy more that one of the pages fell out of one of the books and descended, coming to rest like a veil on a child's burnt face. And so the page that survives, if you like, is this page, and this is Broad's dream, which we referred to in the previous video. She imagines herself as river. Another book, Jewish sort of memory text here, is, as we just heard it, the Book of Antecedents. So let's go to page 196. Yeah, every schoolboy learned the history of track and rod from a book originally written by a venerable rabbi, the Book of Antecedents. So it began as a record of major events, battles, and treaties, and so on, but it wasn't long before lesser events were included and described at great length. So it included a biennial census, every name of every citizen, so on and so forth, family records, portraits, important documents. And the Book of Antecedents, once updated yearly, was now continually updated. And when there was nothing to report, the full-time committee would report its reporting, just to keep the book moving, expanding, becoming more like life. We are writing, we are writing, we are writing. On page 203, so we now have entries, right, from this Book of Antecedents. And on page 203, we have, I think, just about the most postmodern paragraph we could think of here. Infactifice is the heading. Music is beautiful. Since the beginning of time, we, the Jews, have been looking for a new way of speaking. We often blame our treatment throughout history on terrible misunderstandings. Words never mean what we want them to mean. If we communicated with something like music, we would never be misunderstood, because there was nothing in music to understand. This was the origin of Torah chanting, and in all likelihood Yiddish, the most onomatopoeic of all languages. It's also the reason that the elderly among us, particularly those who survived a pogrom, hum so often, indeed seem unable to stop humming, seem dead set on preventing any silence or linguistic meaning in. But until we find this new way of speaking, until we can find a non-approximate vocabulary, nonsense words are the best thing we've got. Factifice is one such word. And then 212, we have this extraordinary passage here, right? Just we are writing, we are writing, we are writing. What is the signified here? I think it's at least 2 things. It's what we've just heard, this idea that, we are the stories that we tell, we are practicing, we're actually in the process of writing, but it's also we are writing, in terms of our subject identity, our being is text, it's story, it's the retelling of a story. This connects, I think, back to ENGL on page 83. So Yankel's losing his memory, right? And he does everything to impede his rapid deterioration. So fearing his frequent deficiencies of memory, he began writing fragments of his life story on his bedroom ceiling with one of Broad's lipsticks that he found wrapped in a sock in her desk drawer. This way, his life would be the first thing he would see when he woke each morning and the last thing before going to sleep each night. So his life is now text. You used to be married, but she left you. You hate green vegetables. You are a sloucher. You don't believe in an afterlife. So this was written in a circle around the hanging lamp. He never wanted Brod to know how much like a sheet of glass his mind had become. And now we have an entry from the Book of Recurring Dreams. And let's go now to 97. Where Yankel dies. So Brod found him in the library. And he was on the floor, fetal, clutching a balled up slip of paper. So the water seeped through the shingles as if the house were a cavern. Yankel's lipstick autobiography came flaking off his bedroom ceiling, falling gently like blood-stained snow to his bed and floor. You are Yankel. You love Brod. You are a sloucher. You were never married. You don't believe in an afterlife. Brod was afraid any tears of her own would cause the walls of the old house to give way. So she sandbagged them behind her eyes, exiled them to someplace deeper, safer. She took the paper from Yankel's hand, which was damp with rain and fear of death and death, scrawled in a child's writing, everything for Brod. And I think this is a reprisal of the image we have on page 43, which is where the baby Brod is taken out of this sort of oven, covered in text herself. So again, she is writing. Okay, another Jewish memory text is the Book of Past Occurrences. So we have this on page 224. This is the book which is inside a box given to the guys by Lister. And it's in that box that we have the photograph which identifies Eli. But it also contains this book of past occurrences. And this is the book inside the box which is lost by Jonathan on the train. And we have a reference to this on page 23. So this is Alex writing to Jonathan and saying, it was a very, very good thing. I must eat a slice of humble pie for what occurred to you on the train. I know how momentous the box was for you, for both of us, and now its ingredients were not, and how its ingredients were not exchangeable. Stealing is an ignominious thing, but a thing that occurs very repeatedly to people on the train from Ukraine. And since you do not have at the tips of your finger the name of the guard who stole the box, it will be impossible to have it recouped. So you must confess that it is lost to you forever. But please do not let your experience in Ukraine injure the way you perceive Ukraine, which must be as a totally awesome former Soviet republic. So, what have we got here? We've got the novel is an attempt to remember the contents of a box which has gone missing, but which inside of there was a book called the Book of Past Occurrences, which was itself an attempt to remember something. You see, it's just this constant going down but at the bottom there is an absence. There's something missing. It's like Trachenbrot, right? It's like that symbolic tree I was showing you in the last video, where there is no center. It's just this future predicated I will, but there is no ground, there is no foundation, there's nothing there, right? So everything reduces down to an absence. And I think that is something that Jonathan Safran Foer points to elsewhere in the novel. It's this idea that sometimes words they're not good enough. They're not sufficient enough to signify a signified which is itself beyond language, ineffable. The abyss, the horror, the terror, whatever. And that's where words just become screenings almost. Let's think of, something like the Twin Towers in 9/11. You remember all the audio clips and video clips of people responding basically begin with the phrase, "Oh my God." What do you say when shit happens? Oh my God. People say, "Oh my God," when they don't even believe in God. Or they say, "Oh shit," or they say, "Oh fuck," or whatever. But you just have these kind of emotions, expressions which actually do not have a signifier, other than fear or horror or awe, something like that. On page 250, we have the truly harrowing and disturbing account given by Eli of what happened at the shtetl when the Nazis arrived. And what you notice when you read this passage is how the syntax itself starts to break down, the sentence structure. And sometimes the events are so tragic that words don't do it at all. So, when we go to page 270, I think that's the point. I think that's the point that's being made. You remember this bit? And you look at that and you think, what's going on? But I think what we've got here is the textual representation of actual war, of actual violence, of actual horror. Words just become insufficient. And I think that's sort of one of the profound messages in the book here. Okay, so we have postmodern wordplay in the instability of the signifying chain. Okay, dealt with that. Postmodern wordplay in the interlacing of text and the metalepsis. Okay, we've looked at that. And then thirdly, we have postmodern wordplay, if you like, in metafiction, in this sense that we are encountering and reading texts which are in the process of being written. These are emendation texts. Page 31 is a good example, and it sometimes provides the humor as well of the book. So this is Alex's account of when he first met Jonathan. He says, "When we found each other, I was very flabbergasted by his appearance. This is an American, I thought, and also this is a Jew. He was severely short. He wore spectacles and had diminutive hairs." If you go to page 53, you can see that Jonathan's not very happy about that. And so Alex writes back to him and says, "I did fashion all of the other corrections you commanded. I inserted what you ordered me to do in the part where I first encountered you. Do you in truth think that we are compatible? As you commanded, I removed the sentence, 'He was severely short,' and inserted in his place, 'Like me, he was not tall.' And after the sentence, Oh, grandfather said, and I perceived that he was still departing from a dream. I added, as you commanded, about grandmother. If we go from there to 157, you actually see a correction here. The word understanded is crossed out in front of us, right? So, emendation text is what we have here. And doing some kind of reading about this, I came across an interesting article by an academic called Vincent Brooke, in which he says this: there's a Jewish tradition of multivocality, which can be traced back to the Torah and the Midrash, the rabbinical commentaries on the Jewish Bible. So the Talmud exemplifies respect for opposing views by listing dissenting opinions alongside the prevailing arguments. So, I mean, if you're interested and want to use this at any point, this is an article called "You Should See Yourself, Jewish Identity in Postmodern American Culture." And I found it, the publisher is Rutgers University Press, 2006, and this is pages 1 to 15. But I thought that was interesting because there seems to be something in Jewish culture which encourages this type of critical thinking, this type of constant emendation of what has been set down. It's a process, always in process, a process of writing and thinking. Okay, so Jonathan is writing the Jewish stories, and in Alex's letters to Jonathan, which, as I said, are in italics, we are made party to discussions between the two of them about what each other are writing. So let's just look at this on page 112. Yeah, so I commanded the hero not to speak, because at times people who speak Ukrainian, who hate people who speak a fusion of Russian and Ukrainian, also hate people who speak English. It's for the self-same reason that I brought Sammy Davis Jr. with us, although she speaks not Ukrainian nor a fusion of Russian, Ukrainian, nor English. Why, the hero inquired. Why what? Why can't I talk? It distresses some people greatly to hear English. We will have a more easy time procuring assistance if you keep your lips together. What? Shut up. No. What was the word you just used? Which? With the P. I felt very proud because I knew a word of English that the hero, who was American, did not know. Procure. It's like to obtain, get, acquire, reacquire, and gain. Now, shut up. So, page 142. Alex's letter to Jonathan. Oh yes, of course, I'm eating humble pie for the section I invented about the word procure and how you did not know what it signified. It has been removed, and so has my effrontery. I have made efforts to make you appear as a person with less anxiety, as you commanded me to do on so many occasions. This is difficult to achieve because, in truth, you are a person with very much anxiety. Perhaps you should be a drug user. Page 240. On a sort of different note here, Alex is upset by what he's reading in the drafts he's receiving in the Jewish stories. What is wrong with you, he asks Jonathan. If your grandfather loves the gypsy girl, and I'm certain that he does, why does he not leave with her? She can make him happy, and yet he declines happiness. This is not reasonable, Jonathan, and it's not good. If I were the writer, I would have Saffron show his love to the gypsy girl and take her to Greenwich Shuttle in New York City. You are a coward, Jonathan, and you have disappointed me. This takes us to, I think, it's not difficult, but it's that realization that Alex himself is being written by Jonathan Safran Foer. the assumption is that they're writing one story together. If we look at page 144. Alex says, with our writing, we are reminding each other of things. We are making one story. Yes? Page 214. We are talking now, Jonathan. We are with each other, working on the same story. I am you and you are me. But actually, Alex is a fictive creation of Jonathan Safran Foer. Now, when I say that in the class, I get a lot of people just nodding as if it's a statement of the bleeding obvious. And I also get people saying, what? In fact, I remember on one occasion I had an almost mutiny in the classroom because the students were insisting that Alex is a real person and this is an actual exchange. But I really don't think he is. And I think there's evidence enough to suggest what I'm saying here. If you look at 159, what we have here is a fragment of Jonathan Safran Foer's diary. So Alex picks it up. I took his diary and opened it. He did not say that I could read it, but nor did he ask for it back. And this is what I read. So top of 160, we have this passage here. He told his father that he could care for mother and little Igor. It took his saying it to make it true. Finally, he was ready. His father could not believe this thing. And then so on and so forth. And then it finishes, say it to my face, not to the floor. And Sasha said, you are not my father. And then when you go to page 274, we have exactly the same text appearing in what is supposedly grandfather's suicide note. He told his father that he could care for mother and little Igor. It took him saying it to make it true. Finally, he was ready. And then, say it to my face, not to the floor. And Sasha said, you are not my father. So the fact that this supposed suicide note is actually given to us earlier in Jonathan's diary indicates that the grandfather's note is a fiction. The grandfather himself is a fiction. Alex is a fiction, a fictive alter ego of Jonathan Safran Foer, and Alex himself disappears from the end of this novel. So what have we got here overall? We have, I think at least, a brilliantly conceived and brilliant put together babble of texts which nevertheless come together in one overarching text, which is this. An overarching text in which everything is illuminated. And if that is how everything is illuminated textually in the novel, I think there's another way, another signified here for everything is illuminated. And it's operating on a visual plane. And so that is what I want to turn to in the next video, when we will bring back all the stuff we've been learning about photography and memory, and see how everything is illuminated in yet another way, another sense. Okay, let's leave it there, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, bye for now.